Welcome to Oh God, What Now? I'm Dorian Lynskey. On today's show, after a somewhat wobbly start to life in government, what's the vibe inside the Labour Party? Nobody knows more about this than Morgan Jones of Renewal and formerly Labour List. Unfortunately, she's joining us to explain the ins and outs. Plus, everybody wants economic growth, but it's easier said than done. Is stagnation all the Tories' fault, or are we just a sinking island in a big wide world? We'll discuss what Labour can do and what perhaps nobody can. And in the extra bit for supporters, news that people are reading less has prompted something called book shaming. Has the internet broken our book brains? And should we feel bad about it? Let's meet the panel. First, the author of The Future of Trust and creator of Jam Tomorrow, Ros Taylor. Hi, Ros.
Hello, Dorian.
Donald Trump ended a rally the other day, not sure if you saw this, by swaying to MOR classics for 37 minutes while surrounded by flunkies. The US media is finally talking about his mental state and fitness for the presidency, as well as his increasingly fascistic rhetoric. Better late than never, but is it too late?
To be talking about fascism?
Well, and his just obvious mental decay.
Yeah, it's not too late, but I don't think it's actually aimed at Trump supporters, people who are thinking of actually voting for him. I think the talk of fascism is basically ramping up the stakes in this election and saying to people who are on the left, who might not be bothered to vote normally as well, you need to turn out to vote. Otherwise, we've got a fascist in charge. And those are the people that the Democrats at the moment are pivoting towards and trying to influence, because it worked in France with the elections recently.
But on his mental state, because there was so much attention, Biden, particularly after that debate when he seemed to be confused and people were going, does he have sort of early stages of dementia? Or is he just very old? What's going on? And then you look at Trump's inability to answer questions, and he's the master of digressions. There's digressions within digressions, and then he's just so far away from whatever the original point was that the interviewer is just baffled. That hasn't been brought up as much, but I mean, is there a possibility that if he won, that he just wouldn't really be in charge?
I think that's a strong possibility. I mean, he's quite old. There's a chance he'll die in office and J.D. Vance will take over, which is an alarming prospect. But I'm not sure that will sway many voters because, and I'm sorry to say this, let's remember what happened with Joe Biden. And for a long time, Democrats were happy to say there's not really a problem when there was a problem.
Yeah, but
and
the voters did think there was a problem.
Yeah, but that's going to count
really
double when you're a Trump supporter. That's not going to cut through, sadly. I'd love to say it will, but I don't believe anymore. I've been hurt too much now.
No. Well, they're trash, Trump supporters. Nothing affects them. Absolutely nothing. Anyway, next up, columnist and author of A History of the World in 47 Borders, Jonn Elledge. Hi, Jonn.
Hello. The US version has just come out and it's now a brief history of the world in 47 borders. What this says about the US, I've no idea.
But they haven't, because of people ain't reading so much anymore. So they need to tell you it's brief. At least they didn't cut down the number of borders.
They didn't. No, it's the same number of borders. So that's nice.
That's good. They like borders over there. Little Bobby Jenrick is promising to make Mogg party chairman if he becomes Tory leader in the interest of reforming and democratising the party. Do Tory members need more power? Would that be good for the nation?
Oh, they're a great bunch of lads, aren't they? So yeah, the quote was, "Together we will empower members and restore the respect that's been so sorely lacking in recent years." I'm not sure the people who've really suffered from lack of respect the last few years are necessarily the membership of the Tory party. But I do think it's nice that he did actually ask Jacob Rees-Mogg about this, because he's also claimed to have the backing of Penny Mordaunt, and he's not asked her at all. She's come out and said she knew nothing about it. So that's delightful. I mean, it is unnerving, the idea of this small group of people who are disproportionately, let's be honest, they're disproportionately, they're older, they're retired, generally they have a different set of priorities, they're very white in the south of England, and they could be choosing someone who will be a candidate for Prime Minister.
Well, sometimes they choose the Prime Minister.
I mean, they did literally choose, they chose Liz Truss as the Prime Minister, and that went brilliantly. So obviously we've all been worried about this and the possibility that they're going to, they're just going to automatically pick the most right-wing candidate. And I've been thinking there's a very strong case against party democracy here and possibly in other parties that we may or may not be able to name. But having said that, the MPs did manage to mess it up without any help from the membership and accidentally kick James
Yeah.
Cleverly out of the race. So maybe we've been terribly unfair to the party memberships, and they're not the only problem.
Yeah, I think party democracy is one of the worst ideas. I know
I think
Tony
it's
Benn is
terrible.
obsessed with it, and I just, we may come to this when we're talking about Labour, but this absolute fetish for giving a very small number of hardcore politicos so much power.
Yeah, like they're the most. I don't just mean like Tory members. Any party members are by definition an incredibly unrepresentative group, not just of the nation, but of their own party's voters.
Yeah.
You kind of need something to kind of moderate that, or you're just going to go off the rails.
Well, our special guest today is perhaps the best writer around when it comes to the internal drama of the Labour Party. Formerly of Labour List, she's now contributing editor at Renewal. Morgan Jones, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me on. That's quite a big introduction, but hopefully I can...
Yeah,
No pressure.
I thought I'd
No
re-
pressure.
yeah,
No pressure.
all the pressure. So the government is thinking about sanctioning two far-right members of Netanyahu's Israeli cabinet whose rhetoric has been openly genocidal. You've got Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich. I don't care if I got their names wrong because they're genocidal. David Cameron says he was working on similar sanctions before the election. Here's what's happening here is that the UK knows that it's sort of incapable of stopping Netanyahu, as so many would like them to do, and sort of has to settle for drawing a red line around the far right, at least.
Yeah, I think that's roughly right. I was quite interested this morning from a Labour perspective to see Rosanna Allen Khan, who's the MP for Tooting, who would be sort of on the, I would characterise as being on the soft right of the party, but probably not someone who's particularly in under Starmer, coming out and saying we need a full arms embargo, which I think is indicative of a few different things. One, like the latent and sincere like moral horror that you find amongst MPs and party members for what's happening. Certainly it's a position I agree with, but it's not one that's echoed at the top of the party and also or echoed quite as sorry, doing too much talking with my hands, which is not great on a podcast. Yes, it's not echoed at the top of the party, and also there's even the things that the Labour government have proposed have been hit back at, I thought very interestingly, by Sarah Sackman and other backbench MPs, but crucially Sarah Sackman, I keep wanting to say shadow, the Solicitor General, who objected to measures being taken by the government.
I suppose the problem is that if you're talking about an arms embargo and they're threatened by Iran, then it seems like you're not enabling them to defend themselves, even though obviously they're using the arms for, bombing Gaza and Lebanon. Whereas if you look at the settlers, who are the most obvious villains that you could find, they are they're just sort of, it's criminal, not just under international law, but actually under, sort of Israeli law. Their rhetoric is shocking. And I just wonder whether they've just kind of like, they realize there's all this stuff they can't do. And this is the thing they can do, which is kick the absolute bastards.
Yes.
Let's begin. Labour's not had the easiest time adjusting to government, and the euphoria of victory has been swallowed by the misery of actually doing the job. What's going on inside this notoriously fractious party that was once described as an old wounded animal biting at its own injuries? How are the different factions getting on? Where does the power lie? And does it really know where it's going? Morgan is here to help us understand. Morgan, I think that the whole 100 Days thing is a little bit of a fiction imported from America, but it's a sort of a benchmark that people like. How is the story so far compared to what you expected after the election?
I think the 100 Days thing is definitely kind of unhelpful. Like I was discussing with various people in the party about the New Deal for Working People and the Employment Rights Bill, and would it be a better bill if there were more time and you weren't racing to do it in this fictitious window? Like maybe you'd have to have less promises of long-winded consultation, etc., if you thought about it more. But in some ways, it's also good because it's good to get these things nailed down. Compared to how I expected, I think I spent a lot of time in the run-up to the election, in the sort of 18 months running up to the election, covering selections and the internal party wrangling over selections. I think those suggested a party that is, I don't think party management is Starmer's Starmer's strong suit. Like he loves to hippie punch, and the top of the party at the moment doesn't quite know how to do the political management it needs to do. And so, but on the other hand, I have long been pretty optimistic actually about the policy proposals and the actual, the manifesto and what was being discussed and what was being put forward on a policy perspective, as I've just said, the New Deal or any number of other things. We all love onshore wind. And so it's kind of been in some ways what I expected, which is it doesn't feel great in lots of ways. And I think the freebies scandal is a ridiculous comms mismanagement and, sort of you stop hitting yourself. And also shows a sort of one of the big takeaways I had over the election was just how catatonically low trust was. And I think there were lots of things that suggested the party recognised that and had sections in its manifesto addressing that. But the fact that they then were immediately stumbled into the scandal obviously sets off all the tripwires of those things is frustrating as a party supporter.
How did you find conference this year, which is generally reported as gloomy? I was there for a very short period of time and went to a party which wasn't gloomy at all. So I do not have the right perspective. How were the people you were speaking to?
I didn't find it as gloomy as people seem to have done. I thought, I went to see the Reeves's speech in the hall. I thought it was interesting and tapped into some of the sort of like thoughts about political economy that I hope we can discuss later on. I went to see Starmer's speech in the Overflow. I thought that was a little patchier and a little less connected. But I think there was lots of kind of policy optimism tempered by real sort of budgets, I don't know, sort of paralysis almost, because you don't know what you can do, you don't know what your movement is until then.
And I spoke to someone at conference who seemed to hate every faction in the party, yet couldn't break away. And I wonder, is that quite common in Labour? Like it's a family that you deeply resent but just cannot leave?
I mean, yeah, I think one of the things that's underestimated in comment on the party is just how deeply, deeply loyal so many people, even if they are feuding with the current leadership, feel towards the party that they're members of. I remember and I've been thinking a lot about the second referendum and Change UK for unrelated reasons, and thinking about people like Mike Gapes and people who've spent their entire political lives in the party before breaking away. I think it was like a profound emotional wrench for them, and I think that kind of goes more across the breadth of the party than people think it does. I think you see the same for Corbyn. I think it, aside from what he thinks on a kind of political policy level, I think it's a profound emotional hit. I don't know, people live their entire lives in the party.
They all want to be pissing inside the tent.
Yeah.
Ros, previous leaders from Corbyn to Blair had vicious enemies. They also had passionate loyalists. Is your impression that Starmer lacks the kind of base that will rally around him when he's under fire, both, inside the party and, in the media?
I think he lacks the kind of people who are prepared to make the case powerfully on his behalf, which, of course, Tony Blair had in the form of people like Alistair Campbell, who, journalists were genuinely slightly scared of because he could be so hard line and so nasty on occasion. I don't think they expected the backlash against them to be so rapid, to be so vicious, to be such of a double standard, because let's face it, there has been no illegality found in what Labour has been doing. It's been all about, well, this doesn't feel good, I don't like this is not the impression we should be giving. There's nothing that compares with the corruption and venality of the Johnson years at all. And I thought they would get a pass for a couple of months, and they didn't even get that.
Yeah.
And so they weren't practiced at anticipating and combating the lines of attack that they were going to get. And also, when you've been in opposition, you're playing a very different game. And he was naturally so incredibly cautious and so so reluctant to make commitments in opposition. And now that he's in government, Starmer, he has to actually do stuff. And that means explaining what he's doing. And it is remarkable to me how few people there are out there who are explaining on his side, who are explaining what the government is doing in terms that people find interesting and that they can understand.
And I mean, is the lack of a clear vision partly to blame? Like, it's hard to ride or die for a fuzzily defined project. Or is it that you actually think that it could be quite clearly explained?
I think it could be very clearly explained as we're fixing Britain or let's fix Britain. But that is never going to be enough to satisfy people who want a grand vision. And, there are wider themes and, I'm sure things like Rachel Reeves's ideas about securonomics and Starmer's ideas about respect and all these things that feed into Labour policy, but they are very hard to conceptualise in a short slogan. And so many things need fixing at the moment in so many different areas that it's hard to build a narrative that encompasses all of them.
Jonn, you were at conference too, because we did a show together in Liverpool, and you actually were doing proper journalism there.
May I just say, by the way, I really enjoyed seeing you at that party. At the start of the evening being like, what the hell is this? It's like a student disco. This makes no sense. And half an hour later, standing on a bench screaming along to the Killers. It was brilliant.
I'm jealous of this party now.
It was a great party. It was a great party, small p. I was getting into it. How much unrest did you encounter there? Not at the party, elsewhere. And sort of what was the cause? What were the grumbles?
So I'm going to be very disappointing on this, but I agree with Morgan. I didn't think it was that gloomy at all. I feel a bit like the narrative had been set in advance.
Interesting.
And the decision had been, like obviously the party's going to be in a bad mood because government's really hard and there's this scandal. So my view might be affected by a couple of things, one of which is I obviously spoke to a lot of Yimbys. And the pro-housing people are over the moon,
right?
Because they're being listened to. There is a sense in that particular wing of the party that they are actually winning. So that was delightful. I didn't speak to any actual ministers that I recall. I was mostly speaking to just kind of councillors and activists. And I suppose it's possible if you're speaking to someone. If you're speaking to someone who's been out on the campaign trail and the result was this big majority in Labour back in government, they're going to be in quite a good mood. They're going to want to hold a party about it. If, by contrast, you're talking to someone whose job it now is to fix the mess left by the Tories, it is possible that they're going to be feeling a bit differently about the state of the government. But I think the other reason that I didn't spot too much unrest quite yet is because we're slightly in a holding pattern. I mean, even now, on the day we record this, we are still somehow a fortnight off the budget. So I went to various fringe meetings to talk about, options in different policy areas. And the problem is, there's a lot of people saying, well, we could try this, we could try that. And obviously there's all these kind of policies out there. But until we know departmental spending limits and what the government is actually going to invest in, there isn't actually a huge amount happening in many departments.
Well, that's why the story of Taylor Swift's police escort is somehow a multi-day story. I just find everything quite embarrassing. Like everyone is waiting. It's like waiting for somebody to come on stage and they're late, and the venue manager just has to come on and sort of busk something.
Yeah, I mean, I do think. So, I don't want to get back into the whole Sue Gray thing, which I'm sure has been covered to death on previous episodes. But the thing I really remember being shocked by in all the coverage of that is the idea she wasn't doing the grid. Somebody else could have that job, but nobody in number 10 was actually sort of working out the schedule for what should be announced when. And if you don't do that, then you're just not feeding the machine.
Morgan, on Sue Gray, the party seemed relatively united during the campaign, but part of the reason for her downfall was all these kind of leaks and feuds and advisors grumbling about pay. We've also had several left-wing MPs suspended for rebelling over the King's speech. Rosie Duffield storming out for reasons. Why is Labour so restive despite its landslide? What has happened to this let's all row in together?
I mean, to break those down a bit, I think the Sue Gray thing slightly comes back to what I was saying earlier about Starmer's party having party management problems. You have all these people who are civil servants and who have come from Sue Gray, obviously the sort of civil servant And if you're a civil servant, you have, there's a more defined hierarchy. I think there is. I mean, I've never been a civil servant. I have worked for the Labour Party, so maybe I'm talking about something I don't know. But I sense there is less. If you piss off your civil servant, they're less likely to leak to the press, and it's less like almost part of their job. Whereas if you piss off some reasonably senior, well-connected advisors who have been probably attached to the party for a lot longer than you have, and have a better feel for the grain of the politics of it, then you're going to end up with a lot of really bad headlines, and they are not then. Yeah, so it's that sort of not having a sense of how to control the party, I think, that has kind of dogged Starmerism kind of throughout, I think.
And unusually for a Labour leader, Starmer has in fact been Labour since childhood, which is not the case with quite a few of them, from Attlee to Blair. But he doesn't seem to have deep roots in the culture of the party. So which ministers and allies are his bridges to the party members and the unions who really do understand how Labour thinks and works?
That's a good question. I mean, I was at Cooperative Party Conference over the weekend because I love a party conference. And so then I thought it was interesting that Jonathan Reynolds and Angela Rayner were both there speaking, and they were both there speaking, also kind of talking about, it's clear that these were people who, it's clear that these were people who were talking about, long experience in the party and long sort of feel for it. Angela Rayner is often, if you see her at like a Chulo reception, she'll say, this is
Chulo
trade union reception. She'll often say, I grew up in the trade union movement. This is my family, and I think that impacts on her politics. But I mean, a lot of them have been in it in a much more professional way for a really long time as well. I mean, like, they were all kind of kicking around Oxford University Labour Club in the late 90s and early 2000s, which is bad in lots of ways, but it is true. Like, they have all known each other for a really long time, and they were all out campaigning for, what's it, Andrew Smith? Is that the name of the Oxford MP before Annalise Dodds? I think so.
I think it's the wrong crowd for that question.
Sorry. It was put to me that he was an underrated figure in sort of party thinking, because all of these people who are now ministers had cut their teeth campaigning for him from, what was he, like 92 to 2010 or something like that?
Very underrated, because none of us have heard of him.
And I can't remember his name. I can't remember his last name. That's terrible.
Ros, what's your feeling about the kind of stability of the cabinet so far? Because on the one hand, we're always saying how Starmer is ruthless and has no patience with underperformance. But if he starts demoting people too soon, that's going to cause trouble inside the party and inside the media. Like, how are people performing so far?
Well, we saw an interesting example of this at the weekend, of course, when Lou Hay and indeed Angela Rayner a bit stepped out of line. As far as I can tell, inadvertently, when with the investment summit, one of the big investors is also responsible for sacking many, many P&O workers a few years ago in an unpleasant way. And they were very critical of that just at the time when the holding company of this P&O was going to invest a lot. Now, certainly what was briefed to The Guardian was that this was not Lou Hay and Angela Rayner's fault at all. And it seems that Starmer gave them a telling off, but there was no suggestion that Lou Hay would be sacked. And I think he's very keen to keep things together. I think all of them, like, we keep coming back to, it's a budget. But it is the budget in 2 weeks. And I think they're all keeping their powder dry until then, because there's no point in upsetting the apple cart and in pissing off Reeves or Starmer when you don't even know what budget your department's got yet. You're going to stay in line until then. And I think it's only after then that we're going to see how competent or less competent they are. I've been a bit disappointed personally with Vivek Cooper, because a lot of the briefing on Europe has been that she's been very firm against any kind of youth migration deal, which is, to me, disappointing. To other people, perhaps less so. But so other than that, I don't think anyone's, as I say, stepped out of line massively.
Jonn, I've been doing some research into the sort of history of Labour, and I was really kind of struck by how there was never really this sort of glory days of unity, and it's always sort of had the same problems. This 1936, this is John Maynard Keynes. He said, "I should officially join that party if it did not seem divided between enthusiasts who turn against anything if there seems a chance that it could possibly happen, and leaders so conservative there is more to hope from the Tories." And I was like, oh, so that's like now then, and is this just the perpetual Labour problem? Is that the trying to get the principles and the pragmatism together?
So in 1936, there had been one Labour Prime Minister, and he'd been accused of betrayal and thrown out of the party because the Great Depression had happened. George V had asked him to oversee a national government, and most of the Labour Party walked out. And it does kind of feel like that's kind of the sort of Labour experience, like, government is betrayal. It's in the DNA of the party. But I do think there's always this thing that, like, every Labour Prime Minister is hated in their own time, and it's only later they get to be even slightly lionised. So like, everyone's quite big on Attlee now. I'm not sure that was actually the vibe in the 1940s when he'd been Churchill's deputy for however many years.
They were very,
and then created NATO.
A lot of people were very disappointed with him.
Yeah. And I think it's only, like, I do sort of wonder sometimes if we will get to a point it will become possible to even say nice things about Tony Blair in the Labour Party because well, he was very successful. He won 3 elections. Look at all these social achievements.
Well, there are
but
people who say nice things about him.
Yeah, but on the right of the party, I mean, sort of more broadly.
Oh, okay.
I think the problem there is that Tony Blair has spent his post-office career vindicating his critics, whereas Gordon Brown has spent it vindicating his supporters. So
this is a fair point.
That's exactly, it's what you do next, isn't it? Morgan, let's wrap up by talking factions. The new Chief of Staff, Morgan McSweeney, is often painted as this ruthless Labour right hard man with no principles except winning. And that impression extends to the whole Labour project. Certainly that's how the left would see it. I mean, how fair is that to see this as the sort of revenge of the Labour right and they don't really know what they believe in? They just wanted to win again.
I don't think that's a particularly fair characterization, or certainly it's a very broad brush one. I think, Morgan McSweeney has this narrative about his backstory, which involves coming up through the Lambeth Council elections in 2006. And obviously that involves a close association with Steve Reid, who is, I would say, very much of the right of the party. I think he's probably, along with Pat McFadden, maybe the cleanest cut in the cabinet on the right of the party. But it also then involves coming up and being in, fighting the BNP in East London in 2010, and working with people like John Cruddas and having a bit more association with that sort of. I was just talking about this at lunchtime because I have a really sad life, and that's the kind of thing I talk about. And his sort of not lack of connection to the sort of blue Labour world, which I think has come to be seen in how to put this. I think blue Labour in that period was connecting to, David Lammy and Lisa Nandy and John Cruddas, and was seen as a little less kind of culture warry than it is understood to be now, as there's been a kind of a more direct split. And so I think Morgan McSweeney has more politics than winning, even though, I did just write an article being like they all talk about themselves as clause 1 socialists, and the first clause is getting the party in power. But yeah, I think understanding the Starmer project as being of the sort of, it is of the right of the party, but it is not. There are lots of different ways to be of the right of the party, and I think that right of the party and Blairite have often become synonymous, and it is not a Blairite project. I don't think it has hints of it, but yeah.
And what is up with the Labour left? Because we know that many members and supporters defected to the Greens or Independents, one of whom is, of course, Jeremy Corbyn. And people like Michael Chesham have been writing about that the left's future is really outside of Labour, which I'd imagine the Labour right would hardly endorse. At the moment, does the Labour left have any power or influence, or are they just shouting from the sidelines? Is anyone in the centre, of power, kind of listening to them, swayed by them?
I suppose you get a bit, depends what the definition of the word is, but like, I think momentum is spinning its wheels. I don't think there's momentum there, ironically.
Inertia,
yeah. I think that's a sincere problem for them, because they did have this incredibly well organized vehicle, really in the car
I like it. Keep the metaphor running.
Anyway. And obviously there's, a lot of their sort of big names are technically out of the party now. So McDonnell, Zara Sultana. But at the same time, like, the Labour Party now has a lot of MPs, but it doesn't have infinite MPs. And I think that there was a lot of unhappiness within the party over the treatment of Diane Abbott, for example, that was definitely not the sole pursuit of the left. And so I think they have a lot more that down but not out, I would say, is the and definitely in a period of low ebb. But that's in some ways we're coming off their like highest ever ebb. Like, there was never a leader as left as Corbyn.
Yeah.
And so, they are in some ways higher than they have been at other points in history, if not.
So you said you think Starmer's quite comfortable with hippie punching. I was just wondering if, like, does that come from him or the people around him? Because I've never been able to tell.
My sense would be, I mean, I do not know the mind of Keir Starmer. My sense would be it's more likely to come from the people around him who have this sort of faction fighting mindset that he doesn't. I mean, I asked at an event, at a Labour Together event at conference, I asked Pat McFadden whether, you'd do less, coming back to the selections thing, I was like, would you do less factionalism in your selections and your candidate vetting? And he basically said, no. He said, no, I think we did a good job on our candidate vetting, and also Keir Starmer's not a factional person. That's not how his mind works. I think that's probably fair, but I think he's outsourced a lot of his party management to people whose minds really do work like that. And, if you think about, yes. So
hard man. Well, finally, UK in a Changing Europe, startling poll here found that Starmer and Corbyn supporters hate each other more than Labour hate the Tories, or Leavers and Remainers hated each other. But then I said you can go back to the 50s and see Bevernites and Gatescalites at each other's throats too. Bluntly, why is Labour like this?
I think that obviously we have a first past the post electoral system, and Labour it's the big party of progressives, but it is not a progressive party. It's a Labourist party. And so I think a lot of people, the like broadly construed left of British politics, has a weird relationship with the Labour Party because it kind of needs to be in there in lots of ways. But I was talking about this again earlier. Like if we got rid of first past the post and had some kind of electoral reform, which is not something I'm particularly in favour of, I think the party would split into, it's a good guess how many parties would it split into? Would it split into a kind of a Unite party?
8.
I think 6.
That's it, really?
No, yeah.
That's amazing.
You'd have like a Unite party. I think you'd have a kind of Another Europe is Possible party, because those are quite different traditions on the left. I think you'd have a Continuity Labourist party, which would fight hard. I've thought about this a lot. Which would fight hard to maintain the trade union link. Yeah. I think you'd have like a Blairite TBI, like what if we put everything on the internet party? Anyway, that's 4. And then you probably have another one just for fun. Like, I don't know. And then maybe the Labourers party would split between the sort of old right Akerstism and, like you'd split and split and split. These people their natural home isn't together, but they understand well enough that they're not doing well without, like, they all need to be together because that's the system we have. But it gives people a sort of perverse and unhealthy relationship with, the whole, I think.
This is why we asked you on. 6.
I think I said 5 then in the end.
There'll be another. Now let's have a question for one of our Patreon backers in But Your Emails. If you support us on Patreon, you can submit a question to us. This week's question comes from Ian Vallely. Given that they aren't going to be in power for years to come, why should we care about the Tory leadership contest? Ros, why should we care?
I just don't buy this. Why should we care? I'm sorry, maybe I'm just too steeped in politics, but I care deeply. It's the opposition. Still, it's a shrunken party, sure. There are fewer of them than there used to be, but it's the opposition, and who they decide to elect and who they decide to become is vastly important, not least because it would only take a 6% swing, I think, for them to get back in at the next election because of the crazy things that First Past the Post is doing at the moment. And if they manage under for example, Kemi Badenoch, who I'm fairly confident will win the leadership contest, if they manage to take votes off reform, they are going to be in clover. They're going to be very pleased with themselves. They may not have that many MPs in Parliament anymore, but they will be a substantial force. And so it is incredibly important, I think, to watch what they're doing and anticipate what their moves and to prepare really for what they're planning to do. And I think it's probably going to be a lot more popular, unfortunately, than some of us suspect.
Yeah. I mean, my quick answer would just be, well, look what happened to the Republican Party. And I know that we are not America, but it is possible. And it's not just that. It's happened in other countries as well, where the centre-right party just goes kind of mad and goes to the hard right and finds that it's got quite a lot of support there and starts saying some really disturbing things. And then that makes the stakes of the election, in America, the stakes of the election are just brain-breakingly appalling.
Yeah.
It's kind of like normal politics or maybe fascism. That's not how a democracy should be operating. And so, there is that sense of well, how scared would you be come the next election? Who knows what Badenoch or Jenrick, how far they would go, what they would be saying. There's so much that both of them say that I find sort of utterly appalling. And it's not like they're never going to, I don't think either of them would make it to the next election, frankly. But the party might just continue in that direction.
Yeah, they're both nudging around, both the Tories and Reform, and now around 20% in the polls. And given the percentage that Labour got in the election, 32, I think, 33, I can't remember which, that is worrying, and it should be worrying.
John, how do you answer it?
Sorry, I haven't really thought things through, and I'm still in shock from Ros saying she thinks Kemi's going to win, because it's yeah, she is, isn't she? That's going to happen. But I'm just reiterate everything everyone said. The next Tory leader could plausibly be Prime Minister. That in itself is a reason to care. But also, the Tories do get to set quite a lot of the debate via their kind of outriders in the media and the way that flows through the BBC and the broadcast and so on. What the next Tory leader chooses to prioritise is going to affect what we talk about and what the Labour government is responding to. So it is going to frame everything else going on in politics, even if you think they're never going to get near a sniff of power. And also, they might get near a sniff of power because these are volatile times.
Yeah.
Morgan, how concerned are you?
I'm quite concerned. I think I'm inclined to your view that would either of these candidates make it to the next election. But the idea that you can predict what's going to happen in 4.5 years' time in such incredibly volatile times, as you said, is silly. It often goes back to the December 12th, 2019. You can't have a track on what was going to happen in 5. We couldn't have a track on what was going to happen in 5 years' time. I don't think anyone would have predicted that result from then, or correctly. Maybe someone did, but I didn't. There was lots of talk about Starmerism's 2-term project, but there we are. So.
We have to see, I suppose, which ideas take hold. So, if they manage to, one of these terrors manages to make just a kind of an axiom of the Conservative Party that we leave the ECHR, or autistic kids have it too good, or whatever they're saying.
Too much maternity pay these days.
There's too much maternity pay. And virtually anything that either of them say, I find rather appalling, and so there's the idea perhaps that they would flame out, and then the Tories would go, oh dear, sort of as they did with Cameron eventually, and just go, oh well, we need to be more moderate and centrist and so on. But it's not necessarily the case, particularly as things become more and more weird and volatile. So it's not necessarily the individuals, because I just don't think Kemi Badenoch, I don't think either of them would ever be Prime Minister. But they could entrench certain ideas and a certain approach that continues with or without them. Now, the Financial Times has a really fun yet sobering game called the Chancellor game, where you have to make decisions on tax and spending and see if you can meet the fiscal rules while still delivering what you want to deliver. Has anyone else played this?
Yes.
I haven't, but it sounds great. That's my evening sorted.
It's great. Well, I overspent terribly, didn't put taxes up enough to crash the pound, outrage the Prime Minister. The message that the game gives, and a lot of people only manage to actually win it after many attempts, being that managing the UK economy right now is a fiendish challenge. The economy's been stagnant for more than a decade, and every Prime Minister wants to get the wheels turning again. Wow, we're still with the car metaphors. But as Liz Truss found out, it's not that easy. At the International Investment Summit on Monday, Starmer claimed to have secured £63 billion of investment that will help create 38,000 jobs, which sounds good. But will it make a big difference? And what is really at the heart of the UK's growth problem? Roz, briefly, let's start with the summit. What did that achieve? What were the noises coming out? What could Starmer sort of boast about there?
Well, it was all about good vibes. It was essentially a confidence-boosting exercise for industry. I mean, if you read the speech he gave, it's like, you're great. We're great. We're going to be great together. It's to reassure the city in particular, who someone I overheard the other day was talking about how the city was petrified by the budget. Petrified. It's like they've forgotten all about Liz Truss already, but not hiring people as a result, for example, recruitment being on hold, and basically urging them and foreign companies as well to invest in Britain and not elsewhere. In terms of what this actually comes down to, because 63 billion sounds great, but what actually is it? Well, there's things like a big AI data centre in Northumberland, lots of wind farm actions, solar, Amazon Web Services is a big part of it, Stansted Airport is getting a big upgrade, which is not going to please environmentalists very much. Some of this stuff would have happened anyway, of course. It just has been rolled together to a right date so that it all comes out and announced on the same day. There's some slightly, they were getting quite a lot of money out of Macquarie, and they're going into solar farms and EV charging. And you may recall Macquarie is the firm that took large amounts of money out of Thames Water before it flogged it in 2017. But that has obviously been forgiven.
Well, the problem is that capitalists are rotters, but you've got to deal with them.
Well, exactly. Yeah.
Now, he talks about cutting regulation that thwarts growth. Now, there's regulation and there's regulation. Obviously, the Truss and Badenoch both want to cut different kinds of regulation. What's he talking about?
Well, he started out by saying, I don't see regulation as good or bad. Fair enough.
That's so Starmer, right?
Yeah. So he was saying
nothing is good or bad.
No, there's good regulation, like the regulation that should have been in place to stop Grenfell happening, for example. And then he said, well, there's bad regulation. And the way he put it was that the Tories hid behind regulators and used them as an excuse to delay important decisions. And he's thinking particularly of planning, obviously, and wind farms and infrastructure and solar and house building projects and all that kind of thing. And so he's making the stakes quite high because his argument was that, my test for is regulation good? Is it going to make our economy more dynamic? Is it going to inhibit or unlock investment? And some people responded, well, what about the new working regulations that Labour are bringing in? Isn't that going to slow things down? To which he said, no, they will make people more confident. But it's regulation is a very difficult thing because it's in the whole, people like regulation, right? And that's what makes it so hard to get rid of it. They like having laws. They want protection at work, protections at work. They want to make sure that the great crested newt still has a habitat and a place where some houses might be built. And it gives certainty. So one of the things he's trying to do is create a new office which has the marvellous name of the Regulatory Innovation Office, which is possibly the least alluring name you could think of. But that's Starmer, isn't it? So it's designed to be like the COVID vaccine task force in that it is designed to identify bottlenecks to things getting done and say, right, we can free those up by doing this one simple thing.
Now, Morgan, nobody sort of wants the kind of, I suppose the kind of regulation that sort of inhibits, things that the state should be doing or that, private companies should be doing. And yet the whole sound of like cutting regulation sounds rather, has sort of Thatcherite echoes. How are the unions responding to this?
The unions seem to be quite pleased with the deal they have the new deal that's just been given to them. So I think it seems like the vast majority of union focus is on that and is on delivering on the detail of that. I was quite pleasingly surprised, I suppose, by the level of seeing all the press releases come in from all the different unions, and they all seem pretty happy. Even like the Fire Brigades Union, which is one of the more to the left, was saying, this is a really good start. There doesn't seem to be any sort of tearing their hair out.
Now we're looking ahead to the budget that's coming up all the time, basically. Is there a feeling now that Reeves just went overboard on the fiscal restraint, and that's why the Chancellor game is so hard to win, because there's just all these kind of rules. You're not really sure why the rules are there. And she obviously felt, and so did Morgan McSweeney and so on, that this was a really important thing, in order to win the election. But I mean, did she go overboard?
There's certainly been a lot of people who I wouldn't have thought being so, I was interested in the Labour Growth Group, which is a grouping of mostly new MPs. They're not exclusively writing saying, we need to spend on public services in advance of the budget, maybe, what's that, a couple of days ago. And then even, people from the IPPR, various other think tanks saying, we need a loosening of the fiscal rules. Maybe is the answer. I don't know.
Well, they're rewriting them, which seems like an excellent idea because, does it really matter? It all just seems so arbitrary.
Is there an argument that, like, this is me being uncharacteristically optimistic, but I think there is an argument that a lot of the rhetoric about how hardline you have to be in advance kind of buys you the space to actually be a bit freer later, like maybe not with current spending, but with in capital investment, which is something we've been way down on for more than a decade, because it's easier if you're doing austerity. It is easier to kind of cut the capex because no one's going to notice that for 15 years. I think it is possible that Reeves has been buying herself space to kind of be a bit more generous on the investment side by apparently being incredibly hardline. I'm looking forward on the 30th of October to finding out I was completely wrong about this and as naive about this as everything else. But I do think this is a possible theory.
Ros, taking the longer view, when it comes to growth, how are we comparing with the rest of Europe since, let's say, 2010, when the Tories got in?
We're a bit rubbish, to be honest. We're not the worst. Italy and Spain both do slightly worse than we do.
Oh, good.
But we're lower.
Not for them.
No. But we're lower than the euro area average, and we're much worse than Germany or France or the US, which, of course, is comparable sort of economy.
Well, the US has been sort of booming.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I saw the productivity since 2008, before the financial crisis, it was bobbing around about 2%, and over the last few years, it's averaging 0.5%.
Yeah.
Is this because British workers are feckless and lazy?
Yeah, it's absolutely down to... No, it's not...
We're following the Tory leadership contest.
It's absolutely not done. It's really interesting. There's something that's called the productivity puzzle, and economists spend many, many, many years thinking about why productivity in Britain is worse than other places. And there's a number of different explanations you'll be unsurprised to hear, but the general one is not that British workers are lazy. It is that there is a lot of underinvestment in Britain for the reasons that Jonn was alluding to, because it's something that you cut during austerity. There's a lot of regional disparity, so that the north gets less than the south. And one of the things that underinvestment leads to is that more people are doing jobs that would otherwise be automated, right? So you've got a bigger workforce, but that workforce is low skilled. And there isn't any point really in training low skilled people to do things generally. It's optimistically you could, but you don't tend to. And as a result, their productivity stays low, and they move on. Someone else comes in, they're infinitely replaceable. All those things, and then there's an argument that Britain's really quite innovative in some ways, but only in too few ways. So we are big in AI, we're big in quantum technology, and we're big in synthetic biology. But while that's fantastic, the benefits of us being big in those things don't spread to the rest of the economy, and they're often startups, small stuff that doesn't really penetrate to the rest.
It's hard to retrain as a synthetic biologist.
It is.
I don't even know what it is.
But when Skynet achieves sentience, we're going to be really well set up to take advantage of that.
There's another theory as well, which I think would appeal to a lot of people, certainly me, because it rings true, that we are really bad managers. That we don't take management seriously, that we don't train people when they've been promoted to manage other people properly.
I saw an amazing little story about one hospital where they'd sort of rearranged the management structure. They managed to cut waiting lists from like a year to 7 weeks.
Yeah, I saw that.
You know, and people
Yeah.
are always going, oh, there's too many managers in the NHS. We need more doctors and nurses, not managers. And then you're just going, but look, if you're actually good at managing, and I think there's an assumption when people go, there's too many managers, because they assume it's just people who are really bad at it.
Yeah.
I just thought it really revealed that prejudice.
Yeah.
So look, one of the reasons we set up this podcast was to blame the Conservatives for everything. And obviously austerity and Brexit haven't helped. But these sort of things you're thinking about, are there these kind of deep structural sort of problems that even if the Tories had made different decisions, indeed the nation had made different decisions, would still be problematic?
Yeah, there's also there's not much devolution in Britain. It's very centralised in Westminster. Decisions are taken in Westminster, and often it's Whitehall that decides who gets little pots of money, rather than regions being trusted with money and given it to spend. You know, we're very reluctant. We hate postcode lotteries. We hate the idea that, you know, that there might be a local authority that actually has a lot of power, because ever since the 80s, the ability of local authorities to do anything has been systematically run down. And so putting trust in them and putting trust in new cities and so on is very difficult for Britons to do. And so we haven't devolved much. Other comparable, you know, cities like with the comparable to Birmingham and Manchester in Europe have a lot more autonomy, and they have massive big budgets so they can actually do stuff with.
Jonn, housing is one area you'd like to see more investment. You're always talking about it.
I am. But I'm always talking about it precisely because it's like, I do think it is a huge dead weight on the economy. Like if you can't afford to live near a good job, you can't do that good job, because the transport links don't exist either often.
Yeah.
It limits firms' ability to recruit the right people. It means that people in their sort of prime earning years are, instead of just having the money kind of spend in the general economy, it's all going on mortgage payments or rent. I do think the lack of housing is a huge cost to the economy.
Well, Morgan, you wrote a piece headline, "Not all Yimbys are your friends." So it seems like a personal attack on Jonn to me. But what was your argument there? Who are the bad Yimbys?
So I think Yimbyism is really having a moment in British politics, and has been probably for about 18 months, I would say, that it's sort of reached a sort of critical mass. But I think that it's an extraordinarily wide coalition of people would describe themselves as Yimbys, and that means, you know, Keir Starmer's said, yes, I'm a Yimby, and I think a lot of people would probably agree with the planning reform being proposed by the government as Yimby reforms. The Labour Growth Group, which I mentioned, is basically a sort of, you know, almost at its heart a Yimby group. It's to do with building and growth, and so those are all sort of, you know, it depends on your factional perspective, but broadly sort of social democratic views on Yimbyism, which do include things like, you know, we need lots of housing, but we don't, you know, including more social housing, and we need lots more housing, but we don't want to throw up like crap houses because they'll make loads of money for developers. Like profit is not good.
Right, yeah.
And so, but there are also on the right of British politics a lot of people who have taken basically a kind of free market view, where, you know, should we have minimum spacing for flats, or do we want, you know, who basically do take a kind of profit is good view on what the developer is always right is of a certain view on, and that's probably an unsympathetic view, because it's I'm unsympathetic towards those people, but that's yes.
Jonn, your other big thing is, I mean, you've got many things, but another big thing is transport. And you wrote this week that HS2 is Labour's last chance to show it is serious about investment. Why is that so important?
I mean, thank you. Firstly, thank you for the acknowledgement of my many things.
Many things.
I'm very proud of my many things. I mean, I didn't write the headline as journalists so often don't, but the argument was basically, the point of HS2 is that if you don't build it, the British rail network is going to break. It's got too many people and too many trains on not enough lines.
I've been on a lot of trains the last few weeks, and virtually and half of them had massive problems.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I mean, it's fundamentally the network is full. So, like, the argument was for a new north-south line, which you take a lot of the fast trains out of the way of the slow trains. You can therefore run more slow trains. So, by building this line, you're not only improving connections between London, Birmingham, and points north, you are also enabling the existing local network to run more stopping trains on the sort of regional and local networks. But none of that sounds very sexy. So they branded it HS2. They made it like a high-speed line. And it means we've had 15 years of arguments about how stupid it is to kind of spend all this money shaving 10 minutes off the journey to Birmingham. And we've ended up in this thing where like Rishi Sunak kept lopping bits off it until it didn't work anymore and then going, God, look, it's a terrible investment. The cost-benefit ratio didn't stack up at all. And we've reached this absurd point where like because it had only been confirmed between Birmingham and Old Oak Common in the wilds of West London, it will actually, if we just build that and nothing else, it will actually make the existing transport system worse. That is absolutely absurd. So the argument was basically we need to finish this bloody thing. Like Reeves needs to kind of face down the people in the Treasury who are so suspicious of trains. They're fine building roads. They're fine spending lots of public money on more roads, but like more railways are like, it's a cost to the taxpayer. We just need to finish it as almost like a statement because it is frankly embarrassing that, you know, this is a country that invented the passenger railway and now we've spent 15 years not building a railway line between London and Birmingham. It's ridiculous.
And we co-built one that goes underwater.
Yeah. I just wanted to ask you very briefly, Jonn, because I know you go on perambulations around London.
I do.
Yeah. Have you been to Old Oak Common? Because I have to say I've lived in London for 26 years now, and I've never been to Old Oak Common.
Well, there's this big...
It doesn't exist.
There
I
is
don't think
this
it
sort of big
exists.
hole in West London. This bit between, like, you know, Shepherd's Bush and Willesden and
Right.
Ealing and places like that. There's just this huge... It was all industrial. So, like, as with the area around Stratford in East London, which is now the Olympic Park and the Westfield Centre, your eye kind of skips over it on the map, and you kind of, when you're going past it, you sort of barely acknowledge it's there. There is a huge zone like that in West London, which Old Oak Common is in the middle of, and there's like about 8 railway lines going through. And the idea is if we put a big station there, then you can build a load of houses and stuff there as well. All that's great. I've been to where they're building the station. They're getting on with it. It looks good. It probably would be a bit stupid to stop the line there and not do the last 7 miles to Euston, though. So they kind of need to commit to that bit.
Ros, following the summit, Stella Creasy asked in The Guardian, why would any business locate themselves in a country that has cut itself off from the world's largest trading bloc when it could just do business in the world's largest trading bloc? This is obviously Romaniac, play the hits. Is the biggest obstacle to growth now Brexit? I saw this remarkable sort of stat that basically just re-enter the single market and GDP goes up 3.5%.
It would, yeah. Having said that, as a country, we're already pivoting away from the things that we used to export to Europe because it's now so difficult to export stuff to Europe, and we're exporting proportionately more services to Europe instead. So if we did go back in, we would have to kind of reverse that and start doing it again. And if we do want to boost sectors where you have to physically move things across borders, like EVs, for example, if we want to boom to boost those sectors, we're going to have to get closer to Europe, and we're going to have to agree to dynamic alignment and all the things that the EU will only agree to if we make some big concessions, especially on youth mobility.
Because that's the thing, isn't it? They're both saying, we want growth, we want growth, we want growth. And someone goes, well, here would be some growth. And they go, yeah, we're not that. We can't talk about that for reasons.
Yeah, it's still too toxic in the, I mean,
It's very,
all about this, but it's still so toxic in the Labour brain. It harmed us so much. We got so distracted by it. We just want to move on, I think is the...
But Morgan, never mind Labour winning the next election. I mean, can you restore faith in politics? You're talking about low trust there without growth, without people feeling like, oh, they're a bit better off. Oh, the country is not, is not in the doldrums anymore.
I think not, but I think I don't know, I have a bit of faith in deliverism. Like, I do think that, not to sound like a mental Starmerite booster, but like, you improve people's conditions of work. I think, those have real impacts. I think ending the public sector strikes, suddenly there's not blighting waves of strikes all the time. And I think there's some really revolutionary stuff in the New Deal. Fair pay agreements in the care sector. The care sector is massive. Like, that's lots of people are touched by that. And so I think it is early days. I think no, you probably can't do. You can't improve trust without making things happen. But I don't think it's. I don't know. As I said, I was at Cooperative Party conference over the weekend, and they are basically pitching themselves as the Cooperative Party is basically pitching themselves as, they've got this manifesto commitment to double the cooperative economy, and they're doing a sort of, local ownership, local agency. This is how we build trust. This is how they're very much pitching themselves in a kind of post-riot space.
Right. Okay. Cool. Interesting.
Yeah.
I always forget about the Cooperative Party.
And many do.
Yeah. Jonn, finally, growth has been the cornerstone of the post-war world. Whenever it stops, things go badly wrong. If you look at the great ruptures of basically, that's what ends the post-war consensus in the 70s and gives us, all that sort of chaos and then the triumph of neoliberalism. And then all the problems that have stemmed from 2008. So, obviously, if you're, wherever you are on the sort of political map, I know some environmentalists and degrowthers, but largely you kind of want it to happen. But are there structural limits to what the UK can do? I think you were the one who suggested in the meeting that just perhaps we're not all that. I thought you were talking Britain down, but,
I normally am.
Are there limits to what any government can do, just given, the passage of time, the shifting of power?
I do think there has been some kind of global shift in that. I think it's the kind of shift of the center of the global economy has kind of moved to the Pacific, I think. If you look at it like the Europe as a whole has kind of like slipped behind what's happening in North America or Australia, say. And I'm not clever enough to entirely understand why. I think it has something to do with needing to import a lot of our own energy resources. But like clearly there are these kind of bigger global forces going on. But that said, as Ros outlined, Britain has fallen behind most of the rest of Western Europe as well. And it does feel like it shouldn't be beyond the wit of sensible British government to kind of at least get us back to the level of France and Belgium.
Is an alternative, could we just drag them down?
I think that was very much the Brexit plan. The hope was that everyone would be, hey, look at those guys running over the cliff. Maybe we should run over the cliff too.
Oh, damn, that was my my one weird trick. We've reached the end of the show, so let's talk about stories that have gone under the radar this week. Ros, kick us off.
Oh, well, this is actually a bit, it's about France, but it's some way in which we can feel we do things slightly better than France, in my view. France is having a massive row at the moment over Doliprane. Doliprane is a paracetamol. It's just a brand of paracetamol, and the French are so attached to it. You can only buy that stuff in pharmacies in France. You can't buy meds in supermarkets. And they're so attached to it that Macron has basically had to say, while we want to flog Doliprane to an American investor, we will guarantee that Doliprane will always be available and will always be called Doliprane in France because we know how much you love that branded paracetamol. And can I say that one of the ways in which deregulation in Britain has been good is that you can walk into a supermarket and buy your paracetamol for very little money.
Well, we did a little origin story bonus episode on Macron and some of the regulation that France had.
Yeah.
That he found really difficult to cut was just demented.
On the other hand, it keeps pharmacists alive, so there is that.
Jonn,
we're not having enough babies. Well, we're not. Well,
enough
is obviously
Jonn.
a matter of personal choice.
Done my bit.
But society-wide, the UK's fertility has fallen faster than anywhere else in the G7, we found out this week. And I do think that matters because I don't actually think for many people it is by choice. I think people are limited in the size of the family by the aforementioned housing market, by the cost of childcare, by the fact that the last government spent a long time just loading all costs onto the younger generation because they didn't vote for it. And this is going to have knock-on effects on not only our growth, but our ability to deliver public services. There's going to be a demographic time bomb. I think maybe this is something we should be thinking about how to kind of make it easier to have a family, because then a lot of other things get better too.
Morgan?
So I'm a huge fan of the BBC World Service. So I was very disturbed this week to see that there is going to be significant cuts to the BBC, including cutting Hard Talk, which if you're an insomniac and like to listen to like a sort of minor trade minister getting yelled at 3 a.m, like I do. No, I think it's genuinely short-sighted and very upsetting.
Yeah, Stephen Sacker's great.
Yeah.
Oh, I love him. So yeah, mine is it's actually a story from last week, but I still think it's quite sort of under the radar. That I've been preparing like an origin story, 2-parter on AI, on the history of AI. And I just found it really funny that Geoffrey Hinton, who is known as one of the godfathers of AI, has just won the Nobel Prize for physics for his development of neural net research, which you know as deep learning, which is basically the massive breakthrough that makes AI what it is at the moment. But hilariously, 2 years ago, he quit Google and became like this prominent AI doomer and became basically the fuck AI guy, and it's just like this thing I've created is going to kill us all. And I just thought it was hilarious that at this point, the Nobel Committee goes, now you can have a prize for your design. It's sort of like, Victor Frankenstein, after his monster has killed the kid, winning the Nobel Prize for, creating artificial life. So congratulations to Geoffrey Hinton. And that's the show. Thank you so much to Jonn.
Thank you.
Roz.
Thank you.
And our guest this week, Morgan Jones.
Thank you very much.
And a heartfelt thanks to the loyal Patreon supporters who enable us to do what we do. We have exciting news coming up of new live shows and new special benefits for Patreon members. So why not join our very own faction for as little as £3 a month, get the podcast early and without ads, plus lots more, and help keep us independent and able to punch our weight in the combative world of big politics pods. Search Oh God What Now Patreon to find out how. We will see you next time.